Hey everyone, we have an interesting live stream today. I have an amazing guest, Calvin, and we're going to be talking about GitHub Actions, but not just the usual GitHub Actions that I talk about, which is kind of hello world and a few lines of YAML. We're going to be talking about advanced custom GitHub Actions. And before I let Calvin do his intro, let me show you Calvin's screen. And on the screen, we did have this. Like, have you ever seen a GitHub action flow diagram look like this? Like, I'm really happy when I get 2 boxes, but I think here you have I'm not even going to count them, but it's definitely double digits worth of boxes. So this is going to be super interesting today. It's super advanced, and I can't wait to dive into this. But before we do, Calvin, over to you. Let us know about yourself, what you're up to, and then we're going to talk more about your projects with an S and your workflows.
Projects, yes. Projects equals busy all the time. Sometimes
open source projects. We should clarify. Open source. How many have you got now? It must be 100.
Oh, feels like it. I do get a lot. I do it because I just love doing it. Actually, the open source thing is a little bit new for me. I've been writing software for over 22 years. I've done everything from small companies to large enterprise to mobile, back end, front end, even robotics, all kinds of stuff. But my favorite is game development. So a lot of my stuff is game development oriented. And one of the biggest projects I have is called Velaptor. I don't know if we're sharing screen. Yeah, we are. Velaptor is a 2 development game framework, and it is built in all .NET C#, and it's all modern new .NET. So this isn't of course, the old school back in the 2005 era Microsoft non-open source C#. This is all the new cross-platform .NET 7, about to be updated to .NET 8. So yeah, this is a game framework. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Monogame, but Monogame is another very popular well-known game framework that is also C#. And it's been around a long time, and it was built by Microsoft many years ago. They abandoned it. Somebody picked it up and actually turned it open source. Microsoft gave it to the community and said, run with it. And that's how I got started with this stuff quite a long time ago, was with Monogame. But as I started learning more and more about it, I ended up aspiring to try to create my own. The reason I got into software in the first place was games. I come back from the old school days with a regular Nintendo system, the old NES, Super Nintendo, way back when video games were exploding in the industry. I'm sure you remember as well, Eddie, because we're the same age.
I do, and I'm laughing specifically because yesterday I went to a friend's housewarming party, and there were half adults, half kids, and the kids were talking about, we should all play games, and the adults were like, no, we're catching up and chatting and see what people are up to. As soon as one kid said, on the Switch, I've got the old Mario World and the GoldenEye, from the Super Nintendo, like you said, from the SNES.
Yes.
All the adults just came in and took over all the kind of the Switch from the kids, which is really funny because those classic games are really good, and even some of the kids are still playing them as well and enjoy them. I know we have Graham in the audience as well, and Graham again is a similar age as us as well, so I'm sure can relate.
Yes, yep, he can relate. Yes, I mean, that's what really got me started into software in the first place. My brother had a Visual Basic class in high school. He brought home a book, and it was sitting in my parents' office at the time, and I asked him what it was, and he told me, but he wasn't really interested. He was just doing it for like an easy credit or something. So I picked it up, and the rest is history. That was back in 1998, 1999. So it was a long time ago. And then I just been doing it ever since. I want to build a video game. But then, of course, I went to many other things. First I had to learn different languages and QBasic, C++, stuff like that. And it migrated to other things in .NET at the time, back in like 2001, when it was first invented by Microsoft. That's when I picked that up, and I've been doing .NET since then. But I've done many different languages and things. So yeah, I got lots of different projects. I got Velaptor, which is the 2D game framework.
Which I've just shared in the chat, everyone. Go and star that GitHub repo for Calvin and support. I've just shared it in the chat. And it's also in the description below too.
I'd appreciate that. Yeah, trying to get this growing. I got a Discord server. I got a community that I've been growing for a while. And I even have the GitHub sponsorship here, and also Open Collective is a method to be able to try to contribute via funding as well, to try to, I'm trying full time.
That reminds me that we actually need to have maybe a Discord call with everybody or a live stream on your Open Collective, because that, I'm not going to start the discussion now, but that is super interesting because you log all your expenses and how much the project's costing you. I think that's super interesting for people to realize the cost of running a project. But we'll do that for another time. But that's just super interesting to know that. So thank you so much.
Yep. If anybody is interested, when they come into here, this has full support for the entire API of Velaptor. So every time there's an API change, we got all the different current versions. I'm currently 1.0, but preview.33. So currently Velaptor is in preview. And people could come in here and look at this API, which, since I'm in preview, it is subject to change. There's breaking changes here and there, but that comes with the territory of preview. But there are guides on how to get started. Everything from rendering textures, audio, keyboard and mouse input. If somebody is familiar with or have messed with monogame before in the past, there is some familiar territory here. But the difference between Velaptor and any other kind of framework is the way that it's architected and the way that it's built. It's probably about 90% code coverage. So, it's got a lot of tests and code coverage, so it's very stable. And the infrastructure uses a lot of dependency injection, a version of control and stuff like that. So everything is very flexible. So that makes the the framework more stable, but also a lot easier to swap things in and out. And then the whole idea is that if somebody does want to use this, they can easily take the different components like the keyboard or the mouse and maybe swap something out according to my API and do their own implementation for their own needs if they needed to. So that's what it's built with, that kind of stuff in mind. But of course, that has moved on to other projects as well, which is what really drove me to all the CI/CD stuff. This is the actual repository for Velaptor. Cute little Deno here. But I also have other projects, and the other projects that I thought I had it up, is Castle. And Castle is another C#.NET cross-platform library, but it is audio. So
I don't want to jump on your parade here, Calvin, but you spelled castle wrong. I'm not the best at English, but I'm sure there's like a T and L and an E in there.
How did I know you were going to call that out? Actually, it's an acronym. It stands for Cross-Platform Audio Sound Library. So basically, it's just an audio library to be able to play MP3 and OGG files, which are very common, especially OGG when it comes to dealing with sound when it comes to the game development world. MP3 had some particular kinds of restrictions and stuff to where you couldn't use it and everything. And now that is gone, but there's still some history behind that. So OGG is more like an open source type audio format. So this library gives you the ability to, in a cross-platform way, to be able to play and stream audio and stuff like that. So you can integrate it into multimedia applications, or you can, bring it into your own game engine if you wanted to. But Velaptor actually uses this library for audio. So a lot of these different pieces and components and projects that I got are actually all stemmed from game development or built from game development in some kind of way or another. And then another one that I have, which is, this one's quite important, which is called Carbonate. Carbonate is it's a library to be able to make internal systems, subsystems of your software, and the way to communicate with those things very, very easy using the observable pattern. If anyone is familiar with the observable pattern, it's quite common, especially in the .NET world. But because of this actually was invented because of Velaptor. I had all these different subsystems in Velaptor, and I needed these different pieces to be able to communicate in a way to maintain my infrastructure in a loosely coupled way. a lot of the times when it comes to game frameworks and engines, things can be tightly coupled, but that's not what I wanted with my engine. So to be able to do that, I had to employ some kind of coding pattern to make that happen. And that's where this ended up coming into fruition. So this right here makes it super easy to be able to hook different pieces of your software together and communicate between them, and then using the observable pattern.
Just to clarify for people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Calvin, your projects are .NET based or C# based. I don't know if that's the right word.
Correct.
But your GitHub Actions you use Deno, which is TypeScript. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. And I'll be getting into that soon too. Yeah. But you could build GitHub Actions with many different things, and a lot of people do. You don't have to use JavaScript and TypeScript. I mean, at the end of the day, a GitHub Action is just nothing but GitHub saying, hey, I have an opinionated way to be able to send in some inputs. And what you do with those inputs and what output you produce or what you execute is all up to you. So a C# console application, you can use Go, you can use JavaScript, TypeScript, you can use Deno, you can even use Bash and PowerShell if you really, really wanted to. So it's very open and flexible. So.
And I think a good example here is your projects, because your projects are in .NET and C#, but your GitHub Actions aren't in the same language, so you can mix and match, which I think is which is really awesome. I think this demos it very well.
Correct. So really, I guess where I'm getting at here is I had all these projects, and like every developer or programming enthusiast, we have way too many projects. I'll admit I've taken on a little bit too much, but I've had to scale back on some things, and I even got other things. I got another one which will eventually be a paid product, but it's called Plasma, which is a 2-dimensional particle engine for video games to create particles. But that is open source, but I'm going to be building a tool on top of that to be able, it's a GUI, it's an application, desktop application you could use to be able to create all these effects and automatically deploy them live into your game while it's running. And of course, there'll be support through Velaptor, first class support with that as well. But yeah, I have a lot of projects. So being with all these different projects that I had, I was running into issues of how in the world am I going to keep all these things releasing at a cadence that is not only quick because I'm so busy, but also reliably. And that's a big problem in the industry. I've seen so many companies or repositories to where their CI/CD was lacking. I was at a big enterprise company, and I ended up doing a lot of CI/CD stuff there, and that's what drove me to end up learning a lot about this kind of stuff as well. So I wanted to take what I learned there and I wanted to apply it to my own stuff because I knew the benefits of this. The problem with it is that it's a lot of other stuff to learn. I mean, you got to learn YAML, you got to learn Bash, you got to learn maybe make PowerShell, you got to learn all these other different pieces to try to fit them in a way to create all these little tools so you can release this software in a good, reliable way. And unfortunately, depending on what you're building, every CI/CD system is just a little bit different. You have 4 different projects. Project A needs this and this to be done to release, but project B does not. So sometimes you run into issues where you can't reuse this stuff from project to project. And that was painful. And I had to deal with that. So the reason I started doing this is I started trying to take all of my different projects and everything that I do with these projects, I want it to be done the same way. I don't want to have a million different ways to release all my projects. That's what this all started. And I wanted to do it in a reliable way because I was running into issues. Anybody in the .NET world will know that you have package managers out there, and everybody's familiar with NPM. But in the .NET world, their package manager is NuGet. If you deploy something into NuGet that already exists, it's going to fail. Well, oh man, I got to get this out. My boss needs this to be released. Well, why did it fail? Because I'm trying to release a version that already exists. Well, wait a sec. Why didn't we know that I was accidentally releasing a version that already exists? Well, this is where CI/CD comes in. So with CI/CD, you can go, hey, I'm trying to release version 1.2.3. It already exists in NuGet, but let's go check to make sure it doesn't exist. And if it does already exist, I need to make sure that I don't try to release for 1.2.3. And in a transparent way, I need to make sure and let my team know why it failed. And if you don't put that stuff in, you spend 3-4 hours digging through your CI/CD system or some other stuff that you have set up, wondering why it failed in the first place. So a lot of it is not only just successfully releasing reliably, but when something goes wrong, we need to know why. If we don't know why, we're going to spend all this time scrambling, trying to figure out why. And oh, by the way, all our customers are waiting for this thing to be released and we're 2 hours late. It's important, and it can be a problem. So that's why a lot of this CI/CD stuff is very important, because streamlining that stuff makes things reliable, it eliminates human error. And there can be a lot of human error. It's automation. That's what automation is all about. So, I mean, I guess the way that I do this, and stop me anytime if you have any questions.
I think you should. Sure, I think you should show us your diagram again, just for those people who have just joined. Yeah, like this is Calvin's GitHub Action workflow, which I think is impressive. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning, I did say that when I get 2 boxes, I'm really happy, and I think that this has got like a matrix dimensions of boxes, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't intend for this to happen. As I was building it out, it just became this way, and which is what happens a lot of the time when you do CI/CD. I got many workflows. This one that you're looking at now, which is the most complicated, is my release workflow. And this release workflow is the same for every .NET project I have. So like I was saying earlier, when I create these workflows, I want these things to be the same. So Castle has the same thing. Velaptor has the same thing. Carbonate, they all have the same type of workflow. They use the same stuff. So if I go make a change or an improvement in my CI/CD, they all benefit. But I got lots of workflows. If I go to, let me see, let's go back here. Right here are all the different ones that I have. I have workflows to do status checks. Every time I push anything up to a PR, this kicks up and does a build, and it runs like a status check. And if anybody doesn't know what a status check is, in GitHub, it's a way to be able to run some kind of automation against a pull request. And if that status check fails, it will prevent you from merging your pull request in. And that's the whole idea. You want to prevent anything from being merged in that can cause issues. So the last thing you want to do is you want to merge a PR where your software isn't building or your unit tests have not passed, like this unit test status check here.
That's actually perfect timing, because one of the questions from Leah is any automated tests in there, and as you mentioned, you've got a GitHub action that runs your automated tests. So how does that tie into your release? Does it happen before? Does it happen as part of the release flow? If you could talk us maybe through the flow that it runs through, if that makes sense. So you've made a pull request.
Of the release itself?
Yes, you made a pull request, and what runs on the pull request, and when you hit merge, when you merge the pull request, what also runs? Because there's 2 phases, right? There's the early feedback in the pull request, and then there's the release phase that happens afterwards. If you can maybe talk us through the pull request. So I've raised the pull request on your repo. What's gonna run?
So for example, we can go simple, because the status checks are the simplest things to build. And I recommend for people, if they want to start getting into this, don't necessarily start with the release, because the release workflows are always more complicated, because you got a lot of things that you got to check off your list and stuff that you got to do. But when it comes to status checks, that's a great place to start. So right here, this is Velaptor, and this is the build status check. This is it. And a lot of people are going to be like, well, wait a sec. Boy, that's not very much. It's simple. Well, the reason that it's simple is because I utilize a feature with workflows in GitHub Actions called reusable workflows. And a reusable workflow is the ability to take one particular workflow and have it provide some functionality, and then you can actually just reuse it in another workflow. So I could have this workflow call out to my reusable workflow, and it'll actually do all of it for me and then come back, almost like a function. It's all packaged up, and it just does a job. It does one thing, it does it well, And then that's what this does. So if you look here, and I can zoom into, I think it's probably a little small.
Oh, that's good.
But
Yeah.
right here, this right here is the actual path to my infrastructure repository, which is a common practice, especially in enterprise. And this guy right here is pointed to another workflow, and it's called build-c#-project. So I have one workflow that does all of the necessary things in a reliable way to build a .NET C# project. And instead of me having to go and use that higher, larger, complicated workflow in every single project I have, I don't need to. I make it callable from a different location, and I just do this small reusable workflow here, and it points out to it, and it does its job. So to give you a taste of what this guy does, I can go into my infrastructure repository here.
I like the way you called it. It's like calling a function. I think that's such an apt way to describe it. Like it is literally that.
Correct. It's exactly that. From an abstract higher level, that's what it is. And this is it. And if you look here, this is longer, it's larger, it's more complicated. That's because it does a lot of stuff to gain that benefit. And that's the whole purpose of a function, right? Is to take something that might be complicated and does one thing, and it does it very, very well. And then it packages it up, and now you can just go reuse it anywhere you want. And then the amount of code that you have is greatly reduced. And also it's more reliable because it's just doing that one thing. I mean, you don't want to sit there and type this out every single time. So, I mean, if we wanted to step through it and come over here to the top, this right
before
here,
you do that,
GitHub,
sorry, Calvin, just to interrupt you.
Sure.
Sorry, just to say that also note that Calvin was pointing to a specific release of that action that's a function, so therefore it's able to move forward but won't break any repos that are ready for it. So I just wanted to highlight the @ a lot of people do like @ main, which just gets the latest code, but the problem with that is if the main moves forward, it could break it in certain projects if they're not quite ready for it. Say it needs an extra parameter or something like that, but you haven't gone to, you have this like catch-22, like which one do you update first? So using that version number just locks it in and makes it more bulletproof.
Correct. And really all this is from a GitHub implementation perspective here is that @ v13.6.3, that is just a tag. It can be a head branch, it could be a branch, or it could be a tag. So if you do want to version things, you make a good point, Eddie. You just can just have a tag, and this right here lives in my infrastructure repo. So all of this stuff, all of this, complicated stuff I got going on here all exists in one repo in my GitHub organization. So my whole organization can take advantage of this. And then all you do is just point to the folder and the name, and then you give it a tag. So if you want to improve this workflow, which is called, in this case, build C# project, you can go ahead and make improvements to it and then version it. And then in a pace that you want to, you can go upgrade your other projects to utilize the later version if you want, like you said, without breaking anything. So as you can see, I'm at a really high version number here. I'm at 13 something. So I've been doing this infrastructure stuff here for a while now. So
I'm glad you mentioned you can do branches as well. I think that's another one. If you have got like a prototype branch in a certain projects, like you don't want to release anything yet, you can use branches. I think that's super clear, super good to use that.
Yes. So really this workflow right here is the build C# project workflow I was talking about. This is the one that's being called in that other project over here. So this guy here has some inputs, just like a function would have inputs. It's the same thing. So I have a project name input, a build config, the SDK version, the base path, and so on and so forth. And you can even have secrets too. So you can pass in those secrets to make sure that you're being secure when you execute that thing under a particular context. So all of these inputs, you can think of them as like function inputs, and then you can use these throughout the rest of the workflow further down here into the YAML. So if you look here, I got inputs, and there's my input that I'm using, the .sdk version. So for example, we got jobs, and I'm going to shrink this up so it's easier to see. And we'll come down here, and we got 3 jobs. And every workflow consists of multiple jobs, and every single job has multiple steps. So this one has 2 steps. And that is it. That is it. You have a workflow, then you have a job, and you have multiple steps. So this job right here, name it appropriately, print, validate, workflow. So for a debugging perspective, I like to actually take some of these incoming inputs coming into the workflow and I print them out to the GitHub console. And by GitHub console, just in case somebody is not as familiar, let's just pick this one. This is your GitHub console. Anytime you see, here you go. This is perfect. I just landed on it. This is your GitHub console. And there it is, print environment variables. So all of this stuff that you can print, you can see in your console and it becomes as part of your history. So from a debugging perspective, you can print anything that you want to this console. So that way, if something is failing or not working, you can go investigate your logs and figure out why.
That's really impressive. I think a lot of people, including myself, a lot of the time just don't log that out into the console, and then when it breaks, they start putting debug code in. So I think it's great that you've got that, because like you said, you've got the history. You can then go, well, it worked here, but it didn't work here. You can never go back and add in the console logs, but you could, if you've done it already, you can go and have a look and go, that's what's changed. Right? Is that correct or is it not? And make a decision that way. So I like your forward thinking. I know they say don't over optimize, but also you don't want to under optimize. And I think that is like the sweet spot.
Exactly. And not just that, but it's not like I'm doing this and writing it for every single workflow. Remember, this workflow is reusable. So over in Velaptor, I'm not doing this because it's done in here for me. So it's not much work to go ahead and do certain things like this. You build something that's nice and robust, and you use that over and over for many different things. So we can open these up, and a step can be multiple different things. This particular step here has a name, and then it has this run, and this basically is running PowerShell inside of a shell. You can do bash, you can do many different things. So really what the point of this is I'm coming over and I'm validating this input. So if I'm going to send in any kind of information into my workflow function, like for example, my version, I want to make sure that that version is a particular syntax, because the way that .NET actually does their versioning, for example, they don't prefix it with a V. So if somebody, accidentally puts a V in there, then you're going to be trying to build your software against an SDK with a version that begins with a V when .NET doesn't use a V. It's all of these little things that can really cause problems in your release process. So I just come over here and I use this PowerShell script inside of this step to validate my workflows. And if something is not the correct way, it'll let me know. And that's kind of the same thing throughout. Like here's where the actual build is happening.
I've just got to say, in your organization, you can have certain controls. So if someone's putting a GitHub action on the GitHub marketplace, then having those validations, I don't think most don't do it. I haven't seen mine do it. Even mine don't do it. But then in your organization that you probably, I'm guessing, haven't published, but they're there for yourself. You have those checks. Like that is like belt and braces. Like that is brilliant, because someone new wants to contribute or joins a team, and they'll do it and they go, but why doesn't it work? And they could have innocently put in the V, because you're right, some people use the V, some people don't. I know it's displayed with the V, because like in the releases in BIODROP, I think we might mix it. So in some places we in the package JSON, we update it without the V, and when we display it on the UI, we just prepend it with a V as a UI thing. But in other places, we might actually put the V, which is really bad. I think you're right. It should be always without the V. Only when you want to display it, then on the display part you add it. But either way, having those checks is just such a good idea, because I think it just removes that whole ambiguity, if I pronounced that right. It is what it is, and this is it. It's strict, it's done, it's clear, concise, no confusion. So I absolutely love that. So wow, lots of I'm making notes. So lots of great tips here. So thank you so much, Calvin.
Yeah. And that's a lot of my entire system does that. There's with the Deno and everything, there's the version is being passed into all kinds of stuff. Everything from packages to SDKs to tags. Like tags is another big one. Every time I create a release, my release workflow would create the tag for me, but the tags is prefixed with the letter V because that's more common practice. And I use semantic versioning, and I also use it for display. So, all of those checks are absolutely done. And those were the problems I was running into is just stupid little things like that. So, putting these, and you make another good point, is having a good, robust CI/CD system, and it doesn't have to be as complicated as mine. And a lot of people, they only got 1-2 projects. I got a lot of projects. And a lot of people just don't necessarily have a lot of the expertise, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. If you have a build status check, and running some unit tests and doing some simple checks before you do a release, you could already be miles ahead from a lot of projects that I see out there. There's a lot of projects they really just don't have anything. And when they do a release, it's very manual. Every time you have to go in a release and you got to get your fingers onto that keyboard and start doing stuff, you're introducing inconsistencies and human error. And that's not what you want. You don't want that. And you also, the last thing you want to do is sit here spending your time doing releases manually every time. It can be painful. You could take advantage of all that automation and make things simple. To be honest, with all these build status checks, unit status checks, and even more other kinds of status checks, and my release process and everything, it's because I spent so much time with this, I'm able to release so many different projects consistently all the time. If it wasn't for this, it's just too much work.
But automate as much as possible and be consistent
Absolutely.
as much as possible, I think, as well. And
Absolutely.
automation helps us achieve that. So it's kind of, they're complementing each other. So I think it's great. And you release so many times, so frequently, and you bring up new projects so quickly, and they're just consistent. So the great thing is, if someone gets familiar with one of your projects, because every project is different and every company organization is different, but the great thing is doing it this way is that, yes, Calvin does his projects differently, but once you figured out one, all the other projects in the organization are going to follow the same pattern, which I think is really important, which is why I tell everyone, even naming convention, follow the same consistency in your project and in your organization, which we're not great at in EddieHub. But that's the one thing. Like, I have no preference if you do it this way or this way or this way. Just be consistent with it, and I think that's really important. And you're a great example of this.
Consistency in software, even outside of CI/CD, is important. I mean, the whole idea that you're going to code a certain way, and you got 8 people on your team, and everybody is coding in a different style, is a problem. That's a problem, not because of my way is right and your way is right or wrong or any of that. It's not about right and wrong. It's about consistency. You're going to dive into a project or have people come on and get onboarded to a new project, or outside contributors, or somebody new on your team at your company. You want something that's consistent throughout, something that they can see once and expect it. And as they keep seeing it, that's less mental energy that they have to expel trying to be productive. You know what I mean? Because they don't have to sit here and try to figure out what this is or what that is. Come to find out, it's really the same. It's just done a different way. Consistency is key. I totally agree.
Yeah, it's consistency is important with what we do, but also the way we do our projects, which is quite interesting. Because I tweeted the other day, you want to go on Twitter or YouTube, whatever it is, just be consistent, and you'll learn along the way. But it also applies to how we do our projects, and I think that's just super interesting. So it's just kind of, I've just joined the two together in my head, so I'm really happy about this.
Yeah. If you want, I can dive a little bit and how I do this, because like you said earlier, I don't use C# for this. You could totally use C# for this. You could use whatever language you want. It doesn't matter. Do whatever makes you happy. Use the right tool for the job. But if your experience is in X and not in Y, go do X. You'll be way more productive. But one thing that I came across in the past probably like 2 years is the Deno platform. And I'm a huge fan. For anybody who doesn't know, Deno is it's a JavaScript runtime, just like Node.js. And the same guy who built and invented Node.js is the same guy who created Deno. And Deno is really a culmination of, and admittedly by him himself, has admitted, hey, the reason I'm doing Deno is because I made a lot of mistakes with Node. And there's even a famous talk about him, a talk that he did about that. And his inspiration of Deno was to do things, quote unquote, much better, more secure in a better way than I did with Node.js. And so far, it's been doing very, very well, and the platform is growing. I like it a lot, and I use Deno over Node.js anytime I get an opportunity.
I have a couple of questions. I know we've got Dan in the audience as well, who's really familiar with the space and helps us. One of the maintainers on the BIODROP project, and really helps us on all the harder stuff. Let's say I do all the easy stuff, and Dan does all the harder stuff. But question for both of you and anyone else really is, I haven't used Deno, but my understanding is that yes, like you said, it is kind of the newer version of Node. They learned from it, and they've done it a bit newer, a bit better. I don't know if those are the right words, but just human me that I say they are. And for all of us, it's the same, right? Our second project is always better than our first project, and Next.js, the latest, is better than the previous, and all that sort of stuff. Why hasn't Deno become a bit more mainstream? Because people love TypeScript. I love TypeScript. I don't use TypeScript that much anymore because I find for open source community project, JavaScript gets a bit more love, let's say, than TypeScript. It scares a few people off. But my question is, people can use TypeScript with Node.js using a transpiler. I think that's the right word.
Yep.
But
yep.
But if Deno does it natively, how come it hasn't become more mainstream, let's say? I know it's a bit off topic, but I'm just really curious.
It takes time. Okay. I mean, when you're talking about so much of the world and the web depending on and being the de facto standard using Node.js, and systems are already built on this and everything else, to sit there and come out with a replacement of the same thing, it's going to take time to adopt. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to the software industry. I can't tell you the exact numbers and how quickly it's growing. I didn't look into that, but I have noticed ever since I started with it, I hear about it more and more and more. They update all the time. Their cadence is quick. They're always coming out with fixes. And they got more than just the runtime. They have Deno Fresh, which is a front-end framework that uses Preact, which is a little bit different than React with TSX or JSX. They got a whole cloud system called Deno Deploy, and it all runs on the edge. So you could write all these applications, web servers, APIs, even serverless edge functions and stuff. You can run those all on the edge, so it's available all around the world with minimum time. It's very easy to use, and one of the big things that's great about it is zero config. I mean, the fact that I can sit here and go like this. Let's just say I wanted to create just a real quick project here.
Nice. Okay, real life demo. I wasn't expecting this, so this is great.
Yeah, I'm just going to do just a little test, just to prove how easy this is. They have a VS Code extension. I'm going to open this up, and all I got to do is just go Deno and Deno enable. And when you do this, all it does is just come in here and create a settings. Let me zoom in here. I'm not used to that. So it just creates that's right here, Deno enable.true. That's it. And there is an extension that you go get. And it's maintained by the Deno team themselves. They're always updating it. So this is your language server protocol. So it gives you all the nice stuff that you want to do. And at that point, you're off to the races. That's it. So I can go main.ts. I can come over here and I can go console.log. Hello world. Or hello Deno. And then I hit F5. And that's it. There's no TS config. There's no webpack. There's no nothing. It just works. You can just start hacking and doing stuff right away. Nice. And this is one of the reasons why Deno ended up being such a good choice for me when it came to quickly and easily creating all of the stuff that I wanted to do in scripts related to my CI/CD. And it's very fast because the Deno runtime is built with Rust, and everybody knows what Rust is nowadays. So it's just fast and easy to get started with. I mean, I can go Deno, and then if I want, I can go in env and I can get environment variables. You can go Deno. Yeah, you can do Deno serve, and you can sit here and build yourself a little server right locally on your machine. You can make functions, you can deploy it. So there's all this whole ecosystem here that makes it super easy. And one of the coolest thing that's even amazing is that you can use probably like 98% of the NPM packages out there. You can use it inside Deno. So if you come to Deno, you don't have to stop using NPM. All of that entire ecosystem is available for you, and you don't have to do anything with Node.js. It's not like you have to give up a lot. So there's a lot of gains.
Got you. That's really interesting. And you mentioned 98% compatible. So that's really good because, yeah, Dan's just written Deno's not 100% compatible. So, yeah, so there are some, I guess, some situations where there might be some compatibility issues.
Yes.
So,
and it's growing every time. I mean, every time it seems to be more and more compatible as time goes on.
True. I just saw Vercel also support it as well, which is good.
Yes, Vercel. I don't know if anybody's heard Supabase, but Supabase is built on some of they have edge functions, and that is all built on top of all of the the serverless edge functionality of Deno itself, and they got first class support with Deno. I have a client right now that I'm using Supabase and Deno stuff, and I can move quickly and fast, and it's fantastic. So I'm a big fan. But anyway, yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm using. So if I was to go into my infrastructure repository just to get a basic idea of how you can do this, is when you do create a workflow like this, you don't necessarily have to use any Deno. Like you can accomplish this without using Deno or JavaScript or anything. If you just want to use Bash and PowerShell, you can totally do it. But the problem with that is that a lot of the times when you're doing it, you don't want to try to maintain a whole bunch of PowerShell code or Bash code right here. You don't get all of the nice, first-class citizen support in your IDE and IntelliSense and all this other kind of stuff here in your workflow. And not just that, but the workflow itself can get unwieldy and big as it is just by itself. To sit here and maintain large scripts and everything inside your workflows, it's just not ideal from a productivity and development standpoint. So what I do, and what a lot of also other people do, is I just use the Deno CLI. The Deno comes with a full CLI application to do all this stuff, and you can just point out and to other scripts that are created, and they'll do all the work for you, and that's it. So, like for example, in this one, let's go to preview or prepare release. So here, I just have a very small step here, and all of my release notes get automatically generated for me, and I use a script for that. So just to give you a little taste of what these release notes look like.
I remember you showing me this before. I think this is what sparked my interest. The diagram definitely, and also the your release notes are really awesome.
Yeah, so these release notes here, every time I do a release, I spell out all of my dependency updates, anything that's miscellaneous, bug fixes, breaking changes are all in here. Like, for example, I'm calling out one of my contributors here from my project saying thank you. All of that stuff is completely automated, and I keep improving it over time. And, I can click this, and it takes me right to the PR of what's going on here. So all of that is done with my Deno script and workflow system. So really all I'm doing is I'm just pulling together this URL, which is the URL of where the script is located. And I'm taking a version into account. And then I'm taking that URL and using it as a way to say, hey, Deno, here's my script. And I go ahead and I send my Deno script these particular arguments. And then at that point, if I wanted to, I'll show you the script. See, validate.
Wow, you spent a lot of time on this. You've got folders and subfolders. I didn't realize there were subfolders. That's really impressive.
So this guy right here, thank you. This guy right here is the script that is used to generate all of my repeatable release notes.
I think it's safe to say you didn't do all of this automation in a weekend.
No, I did not. Like I said, I'll admit I'm not the norm. I enjoy doing this. And and everything, but it's something I've built over time.
Yeah.
I want to say everything that you're looking at here in my infrastructure repository is probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years of work picking away at it as time goes by. Again, I don't recommend anybody to sit there and say, I'm going to stop everything I'm doing. I'm not going to be productive, and I'm just going to go and build all of this. No, that's not the way automation works. That's not the way workflows work. You just need to start small and just say, you know what? I want repeatable releases, and just do the minimal, and then just slowly add on over time. And if you do that, you'd be blown away by how well your releases would go and how well things can go and how much better your processes can be just by that. You don't have to go as far as I did. Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. Just do as much as you need for now, and then as you need more, do a bit more. And as things become like more painful or happen more frequently, and you're like, right, I need to automate that, or you make an error and you go, right, I never want to make that error again. Let me automate it. So chip away at it, and it will grow into something super useful.
Yes. Just make sure that you always take the time to build it in a well repeatable way is all I'm saying, and keep things clean, keep things documented. That way, as you keep building out, it gets better and better, but doesn't become this like any software, this big mess that becomes unmanageable. That's the way I would recommend doing it. Again, some of these things you really don't have to do that. If you'd rather just take advantage of the built-in release note generation thing that comes with GitHub, and you're happy with that, there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe your project doesn't necessarily, it doesn't justify having something as big and as complicated as the system I got, because your project is not like that. My project, Velaptor, is very large. Castle's getting quite big. I got a lot of projects, and they're actually complicated and large. So doing this for those projects, it justifies it. It's for a good reason. But if you have just some small project you're hacking together and everything like that, you don't waste all your time doing something so huge and elaborate where you're not going to get the biggest bang for your buck for that project. It doesn't necessarily justify it. But in my opinion, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. You should. If you want to do nice, reliable software and increase your productivity, you could do anything. You just got to do something, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, it kind of ties into a question we got. Someone's asking about what books to get better at coding. And to be honest, I think it ties into what you were just saying, which is you just got to keep doing it, keep getting better, keep chipping away at it, and actually getting hands-on and, making mistakes. I actually have a GitHub question for you, Calvin. So when you're doing these, when you're creating them for the first time or you're doing something new, it's normal. You're not going to get it right first time, and you're going to have a bug or not get the output you want or whatever it is. How do you keep testing it? Do you create a branch? Well, you probably will because of a pull request. Ooh. But how do you debug it? Like, is there any way to run or simulate a GitHub action locally? And I know Dagger is becoming very popular because of that, because you can run the entire thing locally.
Dagger. So, I'm going to have to hit you up for that. I've never heard of that.
It's come across my path a few times. I don't know if anyone in the chat has used it before. I don't know if Dan, if you've used it, but I know they were speaking at the Cloud Native at KubeCon, I think recently, and I think it might be one of the sponsors as well. But they've gone from an open source project to actually, I think they've received quite a bit of funding, and it's a full-on company now because you can do kind of all the GitHub action stuff, and I think GitHub action will then trigger your Dagger, but so you wouldn't test. Was a pull request raised, that GitHub would trigger that action, but then the GitHub action calls all your Dagger stuff, and that you can run locally, completely offline, 100%. So therefore, using Docker, you can kind of just test everything locally really easily and fast. And I know people are raving about it, but I haven't got my hands on it yet to properly use it yet.
I will definitely, because I still got a lot of features and things to implement and stuff to do in my infrastructure. It's continuing to grow. And it's getting to the point to where I got a lot of things that are automated and good. I actually got a couple micro SaaS ideas that I'm working on when it comes to taking what I've done and turning it into something that people could use for the open source projects for a real cheap price. So I'm throwing around some ideas, probably use Supabase and everything, but I'm definitely going to look into that. And then if it's something that I think I'll poke around and this is something that's really useful, I'll definitely let you know. And maybe
let us know how it goes.
if I pick it up, then maybe we can do a live stream of how to use it or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, definitely step one. Let us know what you think, and then step two, if you go ahead and use it, we'll do something. I'm just looking at the website now, and it has moved on a lot. Now they've got their own cloud platform to run stuff with like visualize your pipelines. But I know you can run it on GitHub. It's open source. It's free. You can use it. But obviously they want to be sustainable, so they've got a cloud version that you can use, I suppose, with extra features as well.
Very nice. Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
Good question. So to answer your question and how you do this, one of the things that is great about Deno or some other language that you're using to run scripts and do stuff for you outside of the YAML, that's one of the benefits you get. If you're telling your YAML to go run my Deno script, for example, then what you could do is you can just go run your Deno script locally on your machine. You could do your debugging in there, just like any other kind of TypeScript project type experience. So when it comes to me debugging, which is one reason why I did this, like all of this stuff, I have unit tests, I run it manually, I build it out, and I do it right here in the editor, just like any other kind of TypeScript software. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't test the workflow. If you're talking about a workflow that is as small as, the build status check, there's not much to test. But when you're talking about a release workflow, this one right here, my release workflow is reusable. So this right here is using some reusable stuff, but the release workflow in infrastructure is quite large. So
while you're finding that, I'm trying to say that Dan mentions one of the challenges of doing it locally is matching all the inputs and permissions and tokens. Absolutely. I think there is certain things we can't check, but I think there are a lot of things that we would want. If you can check a big part of it, I think like Calvin was saying with the script, you can check that does its thing, then we can assume that certain tokens and things and inputs would work on GitHub Actions. But yes, we can still make bugs and mistakes on those. But I think it's just reducing those challenges, I think, is the important thing I would like.
Yeah, see, that's why I do releases. That's my Twitter announcement. The announcements of my software being released on Twitter is automated. Everything's automated. So I don't have to sit there and go and build out a consistent release tweet. Automate it. I don't want to. I got better things to do. I'm busy enough, So there's a lot of benefits. And by the way, my infrastructure repository is public. It's open source. So if somebody wants to learn from it, if they want to go check things out, or maybe grab some examples and how does he do this or anything like that, go for it. Just hop into my organization. You can go check it out.
I love that. Yeah, people can see how you've done it. They can, borrow some of it. They can, contribute if they use some of it and learn from it, and they might contribute something back as well. So, everything in public is just the right way forward.
Yeah, and it's not just the workflows. I mean, all of the Deno scripts, everything is it's out there for you to look at. So from a testing perspective, when you want to not test the scripts, that's normal type of workflow. But if you want to test the workflow itself, it's a little bit of a pain. Something like Dagger, and there's another project out there too, but it sounds like it's not as good as Dagger because they don't. There's some support issues that they have or something. I can't remember the name of it. But it can be a little bit of a pain. When you want to if you want a workflow to trigger, it only triggers off of the default branch. So if your default branch is main and you have a build status check workflow that exists inside your main branch, and you want it to trigger every single time a PR gets a change to it, that event, which is described here in the list of triggers in your workflow, will only kick off if that workflow exists on your default branch, which may happen to be main. So if it's on a different branch, that's not going to work. So if you create a feature branch from your main branch, and the whole purpose of this feature branch is to do the work to create a brand new workflow, and you push it up, how are you going to get it to execute? It doesn't exist on your default branch right now. So a lot of the times what you have to do and I do this all the time. Let's see, let's open up this. Is if you go into your repository settings, you can come over here and you can choose your default branch. So what I do is I manually go in and I change my default branch to the branch that I'm working on that I know I want to test out my workflow. And then every time I push up changes to the new default branch, which it happens to be my current branch I'm working on, which is a feature branch, I can actually go ahead and I can execute it. So, and a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll come over here and you can make a workflow set up to where you can manually execute it. You can have it to where it's automatic and you can't manually execute it. Like it might only execute if a PR gets a new commit, but you can also set it up to where you can just manually execute the workflow. So if my workflow is intended to not be manual, but I want to debug it, I'll just temporarily set up the workflow to be manually executed. So that way I can manually execute it and then test it. And then when I'm done testing, I'll just convert it back. It could be a pain.
It can, and I think it also confuse the community when they fork it. It'll be a different branch, and when they raise a pull request, again, it'll be a different branch. So the branch that they created in their fork, when they hit pull request, if the default has changed, now it's going, it gets a bit confusing. So I think one thing I've tried is I've tried the triggers, and I've also tried saying the temporarily having the workflow trigger from another branch as well. I've tried to do some temporary things, which is also a bit confusing. I don't think there's a great way to do it, but if anyone does know, let us know. I know Dan is saying that permissions and forks has always been challenging. Absolutely. There's a lot of challenges going on there, but I think it's great that we are where we are, because back in the days when I used to use like Jenkins, that was really painful. Because it's all click and point, and then you put little scripts into like a form field, and that was just awful. You couldn't test it; it would be there, and then if anything happened, then you didn't know what people clicked on, and it might break today. No code has changed, but then obviously someone has changed the workflow. So you go back in, and because it's all form field, you don't know what was ticked and unticked before, and you can't do pull requests. So I know Jenkins has changed a lot since then. That's going back a long way now. I know it has changed a lot, but
I've went through all these pain points, many pain points. One of the things that does help is that if you do decide to improve your workflow and kind of move that stuff into some kind of script, that makes things a lot more minimal inside your workflows. So what you're doing is you're shoving all of that stuff that you want to test into a different environment that is easy to test. For example, inside VS Code locally on your machine, just executing using the Deno runtime, instead of me having to come in here and manually execute workflows. So 90% of my testing is actually outside of the workflow. And another thing that makes it easy is 90% of all this reusable infrastructure stuff, it lives in a completely different repository than Velaptor. Velaptor is a whole separate repository. In my infrastructure repository, I don't have people forking that. I don't have people working in it. It's meant for the organization. It's not meant for other people. So that means if I do things like change the default branch or do some manual testing, I have all the power. Nobody else does, and it's not going to affect them. And I have all my reusable workflows live inside that repository. So the fact that the majority of the stuff that I need to test or deal with is in a repository that won't affect anybody anyway. And once it's built and it's reusable, it's easy. I can light up a whole new .NET project. All I have to do is just throw some things in there and it works.
Nice. That makes sense. I really like that. And you're right. Your infrastructure one is more for your project. You just have it in public rather than, and people can use it as knowledge rather than people would use it directly in their project. So
exactly.
No, it makes sense. We've been going for an hour, and I think we might have to do a part 2 of this, because I know my brain is like, there's like so much to take in. So any kind of, I guess, closing notes you want to include And we'll always do a part 2 of everybody else. I mean, we had that crazy idea of teach Eddie.net in an hour, but that's a separate thing. But anything you'd like to kind of demo or not demo, talk about or say as a closing note, because it is Sunday. I don't want to take up too much of your Sunday, and I think an hour has been great. But like I said, with no rush to finish. If there's anything you do want to cover, let's cover it. But
well, you know me, I could talk about tech for a long time. So.
Which is awesome. You can see that energy and passion. I love that. I'd rather do a part 2, I think, because otherwise my brain can't cope. I don't know about everybody else.
Yeah,
it's a lot of information.
Like I said, I mean, what you're seeing here is not necessarily the norm. And I'm not saying you have to go do something crazy and elaborate. I think the thing to take away here, in my opinion, is that one, you can do anything. When it comes to GitHub Actions and CI/CD, your only limit is your own imagination. So I don't want people to sit there and think, I don't want to. Well, no, it's just code. It's just settings. It's just passing data around. It's really not that bad. Another thing is just only if you're going to build something out, only do what you need at that time that brings you the most value. What that means is that if you're going to go create some status checks for your project to make things better for your pull requests and make things easier for your contributors, and you want to build a unit test status check, and that is going to probably bring you way more value than automatic release note generation. You can always do that by hand. So do the big wins first. Do the low-hanging fruit. Don't go all crazy or anything like that. That's what I would recommend.
I think that's great advice. You're right. Do the items that have the biggest impact. I need to keep that in mind when I work on my next SaaS product. So the biggest impact first, and automate more later and later as I need to. So makes sense. Well, I've just shared the repo link in the chat again. Everyone, do go check it out. Have a look at these GitHub Actions. Do give the repo a star to support it. That would be really appreciated. And thank you again, Calvin, so much for taking the time out on your weekend to take us through this. This is awesome. And I look forward to geeking out again soon. So I'm going to end the stream in a moment, but Calvin, if you can stay on for 30 more seconds or a minute, I can just thank you personally afterwards. But bye everyone. Have a great weekend and a great week. And we look forward to geeking out again soon.